Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, Michael people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. With the holiday weekend upon us, the final podcast of August promises to keep you on top of all that's happening in the sports universe, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now as we get set to launch the unofficial ending of summer, I know, break out the Kleenex. No, there's still 24 days left. Just so we get it clear that because Labor Day will come and go, and the next time we meet will be on Labor Day, doesn't mean that we have to put away the barbecue grills, doesn't mean we have to put away the shorts, the flip-flops, the tank tops, etc. So I am one that, even though you get those labels, unofficial beginning of this, pumpkin lattes for Starbucks on August 26th, not here. So let's get it cracking when it comes to what's happening in sports. I just had to get that off my chest. I don't know why. I totally digress. But here we are now, 3 days after a big series that took place in Queens, where we thought, as the Met fan that I am, if we recall, about 10 days ago or so, I thought that the division was not out of reach. And even though statistics may tell you that when you have a 5-game lead, 6-game lead, or even a 7-game lead that the Phillies had on Monday, yeah, it looks like it's not going to happen if you're the Metropolitans. But what a difference 3 days makes as the Mets just blitzed right through the Phillies. Now, obviously, it was a little hairy there, especially the game on Tuesday night. But for a Met team that has their way with the Phillies, they've now won 10 straight games, dating back to the end of last year. And funny enough, the game that they lost to the Phillies, which was, I believe the date was September 20th, I was actually in the building with my good friend John Guerrero. Shout out to him. He's a day one podcast supporter, etc. So shout out to you, John. And Oscar Pena, another one of his buddies too. We were at the game, and true story real quick. I got picked up, I believe it was about 5:15 for a 7:10 start, and we didn't get in until about 5 after 8 or whatever it was. We got in, I think it was in the third inning. And the Mets lost that game. Actually got blown out. And since then, the Mets won those final 2 games of that 4-game series against the Phils. They won the 2 games in the division series where the Mets went on to play the Dodgers, as we all know, in the postseason last year. And then they swept them all 6 games at Citi Field this year to bring us to the magic number 10. And what we saw there this week, you had the Phillies jump out to early leads in both of the games, and then the Mets came storming back. Obviously, they blitzed through the Philly pitching staff there on Monday night to where they spotted them a 3-0 lead, and then they outscored them 13-0 to win 13-3. And then on Tuesday night, where the Mets were down early, but then came back, actually had a 5-3 lead before. It was actually 5-2, but it was 5-3 before that gas can, Ryan Helsley, came in. And here's the thing about Helsley. I talked about this. If you go back to the deadline where I did my live stream, where Helsley was traded from San Francisco, from St. Louis to the Mets. And I thought the Mets gave up a lot for him considering he's a rental. But Helsley's a guy that he could throw a baseball through a brick wall, but it's straight. And as you saw there on Tuesday night, where Harrison Bader took him deep to tie the game, and he has just been abominable ever since he's donned the Met uniform, and who knows what that's going to mean for him. I'm sure he's going to be put in the 8th inning spots from here on out. He doesn't have anywhere else to turn to, and I get it. You're going to bring in Edwin Diaz, as he did on Tuesday night, to record 5 outs, all on strikeouts, and then the Mets, with their heroics in the 9th inning, win the game 6-5 and put themselves in a position where they could sweep yesterday, where Nolan McLaurin, in his 3rd Major League start, after starting off 2-0, beating Seattle and beating the Atlanta Braves. And what does he do last night for an encore? Goes 8 innings. Through 6 innings, he threw 55 pitches, gave up 4 hits, 2 in the 8th inning, I might add. So he threw 7, gave up 2 hits, And then in the 8th, he gave up 2 hits and was able to get out of it. He had first and third with nobody out. They had a fly ball to right field where Soto threw the ball on one hop. Then it was a fly ball to left where I thought maybe they would try to score, at least get a run on the board for the Phillies, even though it would have been meaningless considering they were down 6-0 at the time. But for Brandon Nimmo, as we all know, does not have a big arm out in left field. Threw it to home. Runner would have scored because it was up the line a little bit, but did not do so. And then they got the last batter to pop up. Who was it? Off the top of my head, I forgot who it was. Was it Bryson Stott, I believe? So you had a situation where Nolan McLean, 8 innings, 4 hits, 7 strikeouts, I believe, no walks. And he's the first pitcher in Met history to start his career with 3 straight wins. Tom Seaver didn't do that. Jerry Kuzman didn't do that. Dwight Gooden didn't do that. Ron Darling didn't do that. Neither did Jacob deGrom, Matt Harvey, Noah Syndergaard, etc. So you talk about lofty company in Met history. He's the only one that stands out when it comes to starting off his career with 3 straight victories. And now the Mets are 4 games back. They have the Marlins coming into town, where the Marlins, ever since that sweep over the Yankees when they got themselves to 500, they've gone backwards. I believe their record off the top of my head is what? 7-16? But they are pesky. And the Marlins, when you least expect it, they could sneak a game or 2 from you, which is what the Mets don't want. And other than tonight, they're throwing a pitcher I never heard of. But you have Yuri Perez tomorrow going up against Jonah Tong in his Major League debut. And that was one that a lot of people are going to look forward to, because despite Nolan McLean being a guy that a lot of people thought was their top pitching prospect, a lot of people could look at this guy, or maybe even Brandon Sproat, who will probably come up maybe in September. But when you have Jonah Tong, who could maybe even follow up what Nolan McLean has done, and it's weird to even think that a guy who made his Major League debut less than 2 weeks ago has actually been a spark plug for this team. Because we all know the Met starting pitching has been a disaster, but ever since then, they've actually done well. Now, they're 8-3 since McLean has come up to the big club. So they've turned their fortunes around after that putrid stretch where they lost 14 of 16. So maybe it's starting to trend in the right way to maybe when they get to, not this Monday, but the following Monday to Philadelphia, an actual shot at catching the Phillies. More on that in a second. But for the Mets with the Marlins, they are going to have to face Yuri Perez, a very talented young right-hander. Edwin Cabrera, who's also a good young right-hander, has pitched very well this year. And Sandy Alcantara, all right, has not had the best of years and has pitched a little bit better here in the second half, although a far cry from his Cy Young performance there in 2022. But still, a guy that on any given day could certainly pitch his team to victory. So let's see how the Mets fare this weekend. The Phillies will host the Braves over the next 4 days. And let's say even the Mets get 3 out of 4 and the Braves somehow, someway get a split, they can at least gain a game by the time we get to Monday. And if that's the case, you will take that if you're a Met fan. I'm not expecting a sweep over the Marlins. That'd be nice. That'd be great. But again, with the pitching matchups and how they fall, you're going to see David Peterson. You're going to see Clay Holmes tonight. So you got Clay Holmes, Jonah Tong in his Major League debut. You have Dave Peterson and then Kodai Senga on Sunday. So let's see how it shakes down. Let's see what happens as we get to September. Monday's podcast, I will recap it all as the Mets are going to look to see whether or not they can catch the Phillies. And with that being said, here's the one caveat that I would have if I'm a Met fan, knowing that if they're going to try to catch the Phillies, and they're off to a great start because they're going to have to run the table. There was 7 back Monday, now they're 4, and when they get to Philadelphia, they're going to have to win minimum 3 games. And let's see where they fall a week from Monday. But here's the problem. They go to Detroit for 3 games starting on Labor Day week, and then they go to Cincinnati after that. And Cincinnati right now is falling like a boulder in the ocean. They got swept by the Dodgers. Ohtani had a big performance last night. 9 strikeouts, gave up 1 run, and got the victory as he pitched 5 innings, which I believe is the longest outing of his since he's returned from the Tommy John surgery. So now they're 4.5 back, 5 in the loss. So the Reds... Now, they still play the Mets there, as we know, a week from today. No, excuse me, a week from tomorrow. That's Friday. And they can still make up ground on the Mets. But as we know, the Met record at home, stupendous. On the road, they are 9 games under 500, 28-37. So if the Mets could get any of that mojo that they get at home on the road, well, hopefully they could start doing so in the Motor City come Monday, because they have been putrid as a road team. So just keep that in mind as they try to catch the Phillies. Maybe if they get a game by the time you get to Monday and before they play the Phillies the week after that, maybe they could be 2 back. And I have to see who the Phillies are going to play. Maybe I'll look at that on Monday just to get a better overview of that. But think about it. The Major League Baseball season concludes a month from today. And when you really think about it, the Major League Baseball season started 5 months ago yesterday. Where the hell does the time go? That's why I teased at the opening about summer and unofficial ending and, it's still not officially done. Make sure you still have your tank tops, your shorts, wear white. Wear white to Christmas. I could care less. But that's why I mentioned, and I'm not going to digress here, to just enjoy the rest of summer, that it does not end on Monday, September 1st. So that's what they have there with the Mets and what's going on there. Now, what else is happening in baseball? We could talk about the Reds. Who knows? And I know on Monday's podcast, I had the theme about a very boring September. And I'll wait to get to Monday's podcast before I'll even expound on whether or not this could be a very quiet final month of the baseball season. Because these races, I get it, the NL West and the AL West, and also if the Mets are going to make a push there for the NL East crown. But other than that, forget about the Centrals in both the AL and NL. And the the AL East, Toronto has a 4-game lead over Boston and the Yankees. So right now, all's quiet on that front. And then with the wild card, as I mentioned, Reds are 4.5 back of the Mets. Royals are still 3 behind the Mariners. And let me see if they play one another next month, which would be huge. Kansas City and Seattle. As I'm looking at that in real time. Funny enough, Seattle plays at Kansas City the 16th, 17th, and 18th. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So you got to keep Kansas City in the mix here, but that's still 2.5 weeks away. When we get to that point, we'll see where the dust settles and where those teams lie. But right now, it's looking like a very quiet a quiet September. Hopefully not a quiet October. That's definitely not what Rob Manfred and company wants. But when we go through the rest of the sport, there isn't much to really get into. The Yankees beat up on the Nationals. Big whoop. Am I supposed to get geeked up as a Yankee fan and think, we're back. We've won 4 in a row. Nationals are awful. So I'm not going to sit here to think that all is right in Yankee land. Now they go to Chicago to play the White Sox before, watch them beat up the White Sox, but then when they start playing the big teams, when they play Detroit, Toronto, Boston on the schedule, that's a whole different story. And look what happened with the Red Sox over the weekend after the Yankees pasted the Cardinals and Rays, especially the Rays. They hit 14 home runs in the 2 games against them. And then against the Red Sox, they had to eke out a win on Sunday in order for them to salvage the series. So, yeah, I'm not trying to throw cold water on the Yankees, but come on. They are who they are. So as far as what happened this week, there isn't really anything to dive into. I'm sorry. Royals are where they are. I know the Tigers, to my guy Cole out in Michigan, he has a comfortable lead there in the division, despite it being what? Now it's 8.5. They're fine. It was 10.5 on Monday. But the Royals, although have played better, but they're still 3 back, as you know. I'm not going to worry about the Royals. And they play one another this weekend. So that's actually an interesting series, because if they run the table this weekend, and the Tigers have lost 4 in a row. Now, maybe that's another storyline. They had won 11-13. They went through that rough patch there in the latter part of July into early August. And then over the last 2 weeks have been pretty good up until recently. Now, they did lose to the Royals in that final game in Detroit. And since then, they had to go out to Sacramento and they got swept by the Athletics. And now they're going to play the Royals here this weekend. So if the Royals are going to have any shot, and it'd be similar to the Guardians a few weeks ago when they got as close as 5, and then what happened to them? They bottomed out. So are the Royals going to be the Guardians now this month to see whether or not they're going to get that closer or that much closer, and to even slightly put a scare into the Tigers as you get to September? Probably not, but the Tigers have now lost 4 in a row, so let's see where that lies into the weekend. And then you have the Mariners 2 in a loss, but a game and a half behind the Astros. And what's even bigger is the top 2 seeds, where the Blue Jays are a half game ahead of the Tigers for the best record in the American League. So, of course, whoever has the best record, the playoffs will have to go through that team, which right now would be Toronto. And let's see whether or not they flip-flopped. I know the Jays won last night and the Tigers lost. So, therefore, the Blue Jays have the best record. So, they have the 1 seed as of right this moment. Astros have the 3 seed, and the Astros are what? 4 games. Yeah, they're 4 games behind the Tigers. 3 in a loss, though. And 4.5 behind the Blue Jays for the best record in the American League. And in the National League, we know what's happening in the AL East, as well as the Central and the West for the divisions. Wild card, we know where we stand there. But as far as overall records, Brewers look like they're going to be in good shape. They currently have, if I do my math correctly, they have a 6-game lead over the Dodgers. And the Dodgers have a half-game lead over the Phillies right now, where the Phillies have the 3rd seed in the National League. So right now it's it's Brewers and Dodgers, your top 2 seeds. Brewers are going to be set unless they collapse here. But the chase for the 2 seed to have the bye in the first round is going to go to the Phillies, maybe the Mets, dare I say, or the Dodgers. And as it is right now, if the season ended today, you had Phillies-Mets as your opening round. Now, all the games will be in Citizens Bank, so they wouldn't have to worry about coming up north to play the Mets in Queens. And then you have Padres and Cubs as the other wild card. But that's it. There's nothing else to really go into when it comes to the baseball. Now, as far as the schedule this weekend, the best series of the weekend by far is going to take place in Toronto, where it could be quite possibly a World Series preview. Milwaukee going north of the border to play the Toronto Blue Jays, and as much as people will probably label that as a potential World Series matchup, of course, I don't think people are going to believe that. Now, who would I trust more to get to a World Series, Toronto or Milwaukee? I'd have to say right now, maybe Toronto. Maybe, but that's going on a limb. It's easy to say Milwaukee because they have the best record, but I don't trust them 100%. And I can't trust Toronto either because they have not had any postseason success here in recent memory. Losing to Seattle, as you know, in the wild card round in 2022. Then they lost to Minnesota of all teams the next year. So yeah, I don't trust either one of those teams. I'd probably say Toronto, I can't say they've been better than the Brewers. Maybe shortchanging the Brewers a lot, but that's a good question. Maybe a lot of people would think the Brewers will have the better chance to get to the World Series than the Blue Jays, but only because the American League is much more wide open, where Milwaukee, they would have to play either this would be in the wild card, Padres, Cubs, or let me think. Yeah, it would probably be the Padres, Cubs. That would be the matchup that they would face. And then they'd probably have to face the Dodgers, which that's not going to be easy going for the Brewers, where Toronto are only going to play Seattle, and I understand they lost them a few years ago, or if they play the Red Sox, that'd be interesting, even the Yankees for that matter, but they've owned the Yankees this year. They've beaten them in every series that they faced one another. And the Yankees are what? Let me think. If I do my math correctly, they were 1-6 in Toronto. Yeah, they're actually 2-8 against them this year. 2-8. And that is not good. And what? They're 2-8 against the Red Sox too, I believe. So, yeah, that just goes to show you, we shall see down the road where these two teams will stack up if they do, or where they would stack up as far as how far they could go in the postseason once we get to October, and obviously we'll cover it at that time. But that is the big matchup of the weekend. Other than that, Detroit, Kansas City, for what I just mentioned, because Kansas City's fighting for their playoff lives, and obviously they are at home. Detroit's in a bit of a losing streak, so we'll see how that goes. Other than that, you got 0. You know about Atlanta, Philly. You know about Miami, New York. St. Louis at Cincinnati. Tampa at Washington. Pittsburgh at Boston. Seattle at Cleveland. Yankees at the White Sox. Angels at Houston. San Diego, Minnesota, Cubs in Colorado, Texas at the Athletics, Arizona at the Dodgers, Baltimore, San Francisco. Ooh, it is bad. So you got one series to watch and the 1.5, which is Detroit, Kansas City, and that'll do it for baseball. All right, now let me put on my helmet and shoulder pads and go through the NFL. This will be quick, people, because with the season beginning a week from today, and you'll have my NFL preview, which I may do it on my live stream Wednesday. I haven't decided on that. So here's just a programming note. Watch my socials, because I may have my NFL preview, similar to my Major League Baseball preview, which I did have it on my live stream in late March. I may do the same for the NFL preview. So just keep in mind there as we move it along, over-unders, my surprises, disappointments, my knockout pool pick, Super Bowl pick. I'll go through all the divisions, give you a preview of my beloved Steelers, etc. So keep in mind as the season begins just 7 days away. Now that you got Terry McLaurin signed in Washington, as well as Trey Hendrickson signed in Cincinnati, the last domino that needs to fall, and we all know the soap opera and saga that are the Dallas Cowboys, where does Micah Parsons fit in all this? Now, I would think probably on the plane ride up, similar to last year when they flew from Dallas-Fort Worth to Cleveland when they got Dak Prescott signed on the dotted line, probably over a Philly cheesesteak where Micah Parsons will do the same prior to the start of the opener there in Philadelphia next Thursday. That's when it's going to happen. But all I'll say is this: wake me up when it happens. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. I mean, I've had enough of this. I talked about this earlier in camp. And if you ask me, will he get signed? I'm going to say yes. Because the Cowboys need him. But he needs the Cowboys too, because he doesn't want to miss any playing time. And as it is, he's going to be rusty. He's going to have to get ramped up, as Brian Schottenheimer, the coach, has stated earlier this week, because he hasn't played, he hasn't practiced, and therefore he may be in great physical shape, but he's not in game shape. He's not football ready to play. And even if he were to sign, he's probably only going to play a handful of snaps, a lot of third downs, etc. So you're already looking at a situation where one of the best pass rushers in the sport is going to be compromised, even if he is in uniform and even if he does take X amount of snaps. But you're not going to get the full, all systems go, had a training camp, had a lot of practice time, maybe got into a preseason game. You're not going to see that. The last vision you had of him was laying on the table there on the sideline in the last preseason game. So who knows? But we'll wait and see on that. I'm sure it's going to go up to the 11th hour on whether or not he does sign. I think he will, and off we go with that. But with the NFL, that's it. There is nothing else to really unpack. What? Am I going to talk about Cleveland trading Kenny Pickett to the Raiders? All right, we know that Aiden O'Connell broke his wrist. He's out 6 to 8 weeks, so there's your backup, Kenny Pickett. And we know that the quarterback room in Cleveland has been more than full. And now with Tyler Huntley also cut, you have Joe Flacco starting, Dylan Gabriel, and Shedeur Sanders. That is your depth chart there when it comes to the quarterback room in Cleveland. So you got that to look forward to, Browns fans. And then you have Joe Mixon, who's out, sitting out the first 4 games with that ankle injury. I know it's a little bit deeper than that. I didn't go in the weeds with Joe Mixon in Houston, but that's what you have there as we get set. I'll talk a little NFL on Monday, depending on what happens, but maybe what I'll do is I'll go over in the win totals before Wednesday, unofficial, with the live stream when I do my preview. But as you know, I do the over and the win totals. I take usually 3 overs, 3 unders. And just for fun, people, this isn't anything that, listen, as I like to say, I'm not a gambling man. I do talk about over-unders and things of that nature from time to time. But just like I say, if you're going to take my over and the win totals for whatever it's worth, and if you happen to win on those, I know you're not going to cut me a check and send it to me. Just like if you do play those and you lose, I know that you can't bitch and moan at me. So either way, that is upon your discretion, and what you choose to do with that information, that is all on you. So that's with the NFL. Now, college football. Oh yeah, and Amani Cooper also reunites with the Raiders. Of course, originally drafted by Oakland many years ago, but then bounced around a million places, as you know, Dallas, Cleveland, in Buffalo, etc. So now he goes back to the franchise that originally drafted him. Now college football. The schedule begins in earnest tonight. Don't really have game that you can watch tonight. So I'll pass there. If you want to watch Colorado tomorrow with Dion and their new quarterback, have at it. But we all know Saturday, you got the three big games: Texas, Ohio State, Alabama, Florida State, LSU, Clemson. Sunday night, you have Notre Dame and Miami, of course, renewing their old rivalry, which is a far cry from what it once was. The whole Catholics versus convicts, that was just a rivalry that was really brewing, and certainly one of the great ones there in the mid to late 80s. And then on Monday night, you're going to get to see North Carolina. Bill Belichick coaches first game for the Tar Heels against TCU. So that is your big-time college football slate. I know there's a few games sprinkled in, but those are the marquee heavyweight matchups. But the one that everybody's looking at is Texas and Ohio State. Now, Ohio State, they're going to start a quarterback by the name of Julian Sayin. This will be his first ever start. And I know this is going to be tough sledding. You're a defending national champ. The building is going to be rocking. I don't know where they put their banners there in the Horseshoe out in Columbus, but you know it's going to be a very festive and celebratory atmosphere. But is that going to be enough for the quarterback to show up and maybe show out to be in the game with the Texas Longhorns, who are the preseason favorites, ranked number one in the nation? I understand they're a 1.5 point underdog, but how I look at this game, all the pressure is on Arch Manning to come out victorious. And we could talk about the season, we could talk about the namesake, the pedigree, etc. And Arch Manning, we saw him in doses last year when Quinn Ewers was out, and certainly was able to not only show off his arm, but his legs as well. But now it's his show. And how he's going to perform here on this stage, at this venue, it's almost reminiscent a little bit of last year where Texas went to Michigan in week 2 and blew the doors off of the Wolverines. I believe they beat them 30-3. Where you had a scenario, I understand the coach is gone, where Jim Harbaugh 2 years ago wins the national title, obviously went on to greener pastures in the NFL. Sharon Moore now the coach, where the Longhorns went into the big house and blew them out. And now you have another defending champ, not in week 2, but week 1, where they're going to host the Longhorns. And let's see how the Longhorns do under a different quarterback, but one that we're familiar with in Arch Manning. And the reason why I think there's pressure on Manning to win this game is because not only just the expectations, the number 1 preseason pick, not even that. All right, you're going up against a team that won a national title and everything I just mentioned, but you're going up against a quarterback that is green, we know nothing about. And is he going to be able to, I'm sure they're going to try to run the ball as much as they can to not put the game in Sayin's hands. But could this be a situation where it's early fourth quarter and maybe, just maybe, it's 19-10 Buckeyes? And what Manning's going to do to try to pull his team out of the fire? I don't think that's going to be the case. I think Ohio State, I'm not going to say they're going to win convincingly. I think it'll be a close game, but Texas will prevail when it's all said and done. But I think this is a very interesting first game for Arch Manning, especially with him being now entrenched as a starter, with the expectations of this team to go far, to go deep. We all know that this is a rematch from the semifinal last year, the Jack Sawyer strip sack fumble return for a touchdown, which iced the game and then propelled them to go to the national championship and then win the whole thing, as you know. But obviously, this is not January. This is late August. And what we'll see here, I think, is going to be a very good game. It's probably be tooth and nail. Would I be surprised if the Buckeyes somehow, some way put a number on them similar to what they did to Michigan last year? I can't say I would, but that's going to be predicated on the performance of Sayin under center for the Buckeyes. Because if Sayin's going to have one of those 9 for 22, 56 yards and 3 interceptions, then that game's going to be a blowout. But if he's methodical, doesn't screw up, protects the ball, it'll probably be a close game. So I don't know. I'm going to probably give Sayin a little bit more credit because I've never seen him. I have not laid my eyes on him. So I can't even tell you how he's going to perform. But I would think he's probably going to perform more bad than good. Because I know that Texas Longhorn defense, we know they're stacked. And I'm sure they're going to come at Sayin with the kitchen sink and then some. Because they're going to do whatever it takes to rattle that kid, to fluster him, and to make him turn the ball over. And that's where you put him in short fields. Arch Manning could do his thing, and away we go. So if that's going to be the recipe, and I'm sure that's what Texas is going to want to try to do, then this could be a long afternoon for the Buckeyes. But I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt for now and see how it's going to unfold. And I'm sure everybody else is going to wonder whether or not Manning, here in this first game, a lot of pressure on him to perform, and not only that, but to win this game, considering what the Buckeyes are going to have to deal with, especially with their new quarterback and how he's going to play here in this first game. And overall, I could give you a college football preview. We know who the top-heavy teams are, who's going to be this year's SMU or Indiana. Right now, it's up in the air. I could go through the rankings. I could go and say, oh, this team, that team. Yeah, I could say all that. But to me, let's see what I can't even go by what the first month is going to give you. I would say after the first 7 weeks, you'll get a better idea. And even then, it's not going to be clear. Because when you look back to last year, and that's all I'm going to base it on, when Indiana, I understand they played in the Big Ten, but they played a very soft schedule. And it's a thing where, yes, they did play against Penn State, and they played against teams that obviously are of a bigger class. But if we're going to look at a team that's going to be hovering or hanging around in the playoff picture, that's in that 9 through 12 ranking, you're not going to base what they've done after 7 weeks. You almost have to go maybe even 8, 9, or 10. Because as you get deeper into the season, when they're going to play much more stiffer competition, that's when you're going to be able to grade it on. And yes, can I tell you right now who's going to be that Cinderella? I can't. Because any one of these teams could just shoot up the college football rankings. And I get it that the committee is going to have to look at these teams and say, hey, do we really want to have this team there or that? Well, obviously, they had Indiana there and not Alabama last year, or SMU for that matter, or teams like that. So, to me, we would think that the cream's going to rise to the top, whether you are Texas, whether you are Ohio State, whether you are Oregon, whether you are Georgia, whether you are Clemson, teams like that. And Clemson-LSU, I think, is a fascinating game there on Saturday night, which, you know what, might as well touch on it now. Alabama's second year for Kalen DeBoer as coach. New quarterback in tow. The expectations there for Alabama, it's championship or bust. It's not make the playoff. It's not get to the semifinal. It's not get to the final. It's to win the whole enchilada. And DeBoer knows that. And let's see if Alabama can rebound after not making it to the postseason last year. Now they're going to go to Florida State, where Florida State has been awful in these first games over the last couple of years. In Dublin last year, losing to Georgia Tech. The year before that, losing to LSU. Maybe they turn their fortunes around and somehow, some way, beat the Crimson Tide here in this opening game. Who knows? But for LSU and Clemson, because Clemson, they play in a division that's very soft, or conference, I should say, very soft. I know you may have North Carolina staring at you there down the road with Belichick, but LSU, let's see if they could get off on the right foot here to beat a Clemson team, which you would think Dabo Swinney is wanting to try to get back to a playoff, try to get back to a semifinal and a final, because ever since the days of Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, he has not come close. And Clemson playing in that ACC, I understand, you play who you play, and that's that. But to me, this is going to be a telltale sign. More so on Clemson. There's a lot of pressure on them to win this game. Because LSU, you think they'd be in the thick of things. You think they'd be in a hunt. We know they play in a brutal conference. And LSU, who fell short last year, this game to me means more for Clemson than it does for LSU. For so many reasons. Because Dabo Swinney wanted to get back, wanted to get off to a good start. And let's see if that's going to be the case there come Saturday. And I'll recap it all there on Monday. Looking forward to seeing how this is all going to transpire. I'll try to watch as much as I can. I'm more focused on the Texas and Ohio State game. And then if I go out throughout the course of the day, obviously I'll keep tabs on the phone. I'll have to read up on it, watch highlights, kind of really get into what the afternoon and the night game with LSU and Clemson. And then we'll have Notre Dame, Miami there on Sunday night. And then obviously Monday we'll be back here to recap it all for you on the latest podcast. All right, now let me lace up the high tops. Quick basketball notes for the NBA and WNBA. And Dawn Staley, who I respect and admire, longtime coach there at South Carolina, has won 3 championships in the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. Got to give her a daps. And she had recently come out on a podcast to where she said that she did interview for the head coaching position for the Knicks and how she felt it went according to how she felt all the other interviews had gone with the candidates that were there, the Taylor Jenkins of the world, the Micah Norries, the coaches like that. We all know that Mike Brown, the former Cavalier, Sacramento King coach, got the job there a couple months back. But the one thing that she did say, which I found fascinating, was she probably cost herself their own job by asking too many questions. And kudos to her. You know, she's not going to walk into a room, even with her credentials, to just kind of look around and be like, oh, hey, you know, all right, great. And no, she came prepared. She came ready. And here's the one thing. We know that Knicks front office, they are Teflon. They try to mask. They try to cover. They'll do anything to protect their identity, to protect their reputation, to protect anything and everything that happens within the walls of One Penn Plaza down by Madison Square Garden. Because unlike Jerry Jones, and mind you, we're not even talking about James Dolan, the owner. We're talking about Leon Rose. We're talking about William Wesley. I won't call him by his nickname. Those are the guys that are pretty much running the operation there for the Knicks. Those guys, they don't want to be seen in public. They don't want to even meet the media. So for Staley to come out and say that I asked too many questions, I even asked them, if you guys were to hire me, knowing that I am a woman, and we all know that you're going to hire a man, it's not going to be bombarded with a bunch of questions. But if you hire me, you know, being in the media capital of the world, being in New York City, playing at the Garden, a team that has not won a championship 53 years, or going on 53, that if I were to be the head coach, how are you going to respond to that? How are you going to react to that? How are you going to answer those questions? And of course, I'm paraphrasing in some of that, but she even saw it in the front office faces, how they didn't quite think of that. Or they didn't look at it as a situation where it's like, well, you know what? Hey, if we do hire you, it's because you're qualified for the job and that we believe in you, so on and so forth. I'm not going to sit here. I was not in the room, and nor did Dawn Staley even expound on that, but I'm not going to sit here and think that they had dumbfounded looks on their faces, but I'm sure their demeanor, disposition, and let me see if I can pull that up real quick, because what she said was fascinating. And it's an indictment on the Knicks front office to almost have to ponder that if Dawn Staley got the job, like, oh, what does this mean for us? Here we go. Let me pull this up. She said that if she would have gotten a position, she would have had to do it, meaning that she would have left South Carolina. Not just for me, for women to break that door open. I would have had to. It's the Knicks. I'm from Philly, but it's the freaking Knicks. Obviously, she's a Philadelphia native, so, you know, Philly and New York are like oil and water. But here's what she said. Here's a quote. I shot myself in the foot by being inquisitive and asking all those darn questions. Because on the podcast, she wondered if she heard her chances by asking the Knicks brass if they had fully considered or were prepared for hiring the first woman full-time NBA coach that would change the organization. So she asked, here's a quote, how, if you hired me as the first female coach in the NBA, would it impact your daily job? Because it would. Staley said, as she asked during the interview process with the Knicks, you're going to be asked questions that you don't have to answer if you're a male coach. There's going to be the media and all this other stuff that they have to deal with that you didn't have to deal with that if you hired a male. That got them to thinking, maybe she's right. I felt the energy change after that. And then she said, I shot myself in the foot, being inquisitive, etc. So she felt the energy. And even though I projected by saying, did they have dumbfounded looks? Did the oxygen come out of the room? Did they kind of look around at each other and say, oh yeah, she has a point? Well, that's not on Staley. That is on the aforementioned Rose, Wesley, and maybe even if James Dolan was in the room. Which goes to show you that despite the Knicks and their recent success, despite them jettisoning Tom Thibodeau unceremoniously, but let's face it, the hierarchy at the Garden was shook when she brought those questions up. And unfortunately, she didn't get the job, but that just goes to show you how the front office, they may have been prepared, but they were not. As evidenced not only by this interview process with Dawn Staley, but by trying to reach out to Ime Udoka, to Chris Finch, to other coaches that were under contract that there was no way, shape, or form that they were going to break the contract or even grant permission to the Knicks in order for them to have their current coaches be in an interview process with the Knicks. I tell you, only them could screw up a lottery ticket, and they can only hope that Mike Brown has anywhere close to the success that Tom Thibodeau had over the last 5 years, because if they didn't, then people may even think, even yours truly, that Dawn Staley could have been the head coach of the Knicks. And as far as the W goes, the Las Vegas Aces, they are coming up with aces and 7s and 11s because they are in the midst of a 12-game winning streak, currently in second place. Now, I don't know how the breakdown of the playoffs, I don't know if they do it 1 through 4 or 1 through 8. I don't know. And this is me trying to get back. I would say get back. Let me reel that in. This is me trying to get into more of the WNBA as I detailed during their All-Star break and my vlog that I put up. What was it, about 6 weeks ago? So you want to check that on the YouTube channel. I appreciate it. But my commentary, it wasn't a vlog, it was just a commentary on that. But for the Aces, this is a team, as we all know, A'ja Wilson. They've won titles most recently, and they won back-to-back in the process. Now you have to wonder whether or not the Minnesota Lynx, should they be looking over their shoulder, considering the Lynx have had a big year. They've had their best player come back in Nafisa Collier. And even with the Liberty, Breanna Stewart, who came back from that bone bruise, missing 13 games. I know Sabrina Ionescu has also been hurt recently. I don't think to that extent, but there's been a lot that's happened here with some of these teams. But the Aces have played phenomenally here. And now, can you even think that the Aces have a shot to win this whole thing? Are they peaking at the right moment? Are they at a point where, yeah, now we're going to look to see if they could get that title back? Obviously, they didn't make it to the finals last year. That was the Liberty and the Lynx, as you know. And for an Aces team with A'ja Wilson, can they reclaim their top spot? Not necessarily in the whole WNBA, because I believe that the Lynx have enough of a lead because the season is going to conclude in about another 2 weeks. And you know what? Let me pull that up real quick. Do they play one another? Maybe they play one more time. So if I look at this in real time, Aces have how many games left? Look at that. Now, that's not until next week. No, they have a week off. The next game on the schedule for the Las Vegas Aces, are you ready for this? Now, they just played last night against the Atlanta Dream and winning their 12th straight and actually surpassed them in the standings. But their next game isn't until a week from today. And who do they play in the process? At home against the Lynx. Now, they close out the year. They play back-to-back against Chicago, and then they go to LA to close out their year. So they're not going to catch them. I believe they're what, like 5 games back overall? As I pull up the standings here. Vegas is now, oh yeah, no, they're 5.5. They're 7 in the loss. So yeah, the Minnesota's, they've already clinched. But I don't know where these standings fall. Do they do the playoffs 1 through 8? Do they do it East and West? I would assume that they do so. And is it top 4 or top 8? It's got to be top 4, I guess. Right? So that means the Aces will play the Lynx in the first round, where the Liberty will play the Dream. I think that's how it breaks down. I don't know. This is where I'm going to have to get familiar with it. Let me see. WNBA playoffs. Let me click that tab real quick. Now, the postseason starts September 14th. You got first round, semifinal. Oh, so you're going to have 3 rounds. So you got a first round, semifinal. You'd think I'd know that, but this is what happens when you don't follow the women's sport at all. And I'm picking it up now in mid-season for the first time, talking about it on the podcast on a consistent basis. So, right, there is an adjustment or maybe a bit of a learning curve for yours truly. So, yeah. So, September 14th, the playoffs start. I guess you're going to have then probably 6 teams where it's 3-3. Maybe the teams that have the play in the semifinal have a bye, because I believe that's a best of 3, right? That first round is best of 3, best of 5, best of 7. I believe that's how it breaks down, because the NBA Finals is best of 7. And it concludes on a Friday, October 17th, if it goes to Game 7 there in the WNBA. And they have 2 games on Sundays, which that's not good. Game 2 is Sunday, 3 o'clock. Nobody's going to, I mean, it is what it is. But that's what you have with the WNBA as far as the aces. So you got to definitely keep an eye out for them to see whether or not they're going to be a threat to the Lynx there in the Western Conference or even just overall, as they will not get the top spot, but they certainly are playing their best at the right time. All right, now lastly, let's break out the tennis rackets, because the U.S. Open has been a bit of a snooze fest. Now, I understand you had Daniil Medvedev, I talked about on Monday, who lost as the tournament began on Sunday and also got fined for his display there, slamming his racket, which I didn't talk about. I talked about the situation with the photographer in the third set, and how Medvedev was upset, how his opponent had to reserve at that point. Not that that made a difference in the match, because it went the distance. It went a full 5 before Medvedev lost in that final set. I believe it was 4-6. And then he slammed his racket 100 times. He looked like a fool. But you had Madison Keys losing earlier this week to Renata Zarazua, who I never heard of, I believe from Mexico. And she lost in a very thrilling match, 6-7, 7-6, 7-5, but she was very sloppy in the match, had too many errors, 14 double faults, just not a good performance by the Australian Open winner this year. And for Keys to leave early, now that's been the big upset. I know Coco Gauff had a little bit of trouble in her match, although she did win, but went 3 sets, and Gauff, as you know, had a one and done at Wimbledon after winning the French Open. But other than that, you really haven't had a lot to sink your teeth into. It's been chalk so far, which, okay, it's fine. Let's see as we get into the weekend how that's going to play out as we get to Monday and week 2 of this tournament. So, I'll keep my eyes peeled to see what's going to happen there on the other side of the bridge there in Flushing Meadow. And the one thing I do like is Carlos Alcaraz. Now, I don't know if he buzzed his hair prior to this tournament or maybe before Cincinnati when he beat Jannik Sinner, or really Sinner had to retire due to illness in that big event. But I like the short haircut on Alcaraz. He looks a little tough. Looks like he means business. So let's see, as we talked about there on Monday's podcast, whether or not we're going to have a third matchup in a final round between Alcaraz and Sinner. So obviously that is still intact. But other than that, nothing. I mean, am I going to talk about Venus losing in the first round as a wild card? I'm not going to. I mean, Venus Williams, I understand she's a legend, all-time great, etc. But listen, it'd be more of a story if she was still playing right now. So I'm not even going to unpack that. But the tennis has been really quiet. Unlike the Wimbledon, when you had women's players leaving left and right, falling by the wayside. But not the case here, and the same for the men's. Other than Medvedev and Keys, it's pretty much been business as usual there in Flushing Meadow. So I'll keep an eye on what's going to happen here over the next 3 days before we reconnect there on Monday. And that'll do it, my good people. That is it. But guess what? Monday will be a jam-packed podcast. Obviously, the college football, NFL over-unders, whatever's happening in baseball, whatever's happening at the U.S. Open. And from that point on, it will certainly pick up. The Sports Dead Zone lid is just about closed. 2.0, as now we'll get into September, football, and of course, once we get into October, it's really going to be frenetic, or frantic. I get my words. It'll be frantic, frenzy, frenetic, whatever F word you want to put in, please do so, because it's going to be on and popping in the sports world. But thank you so much for passing by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the wonderful world of sports. If you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, review, my good people. The little engine that could, this podcast, which is going to reach an anniversary on Monday and also another milestone next week. If you're curious, come back on Monday and you'll find out. So subscribe on Apple, Spotify. The website is JAYREELZ.com. the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. I have content galore. And I just put up a video yesterday. Sports media, is it broken? June Lee, a former ESPN personality now on YouTube, certainly breaks it down. And I also add a few addendums to that. This is a critique video that's not really critical. It's actually dissecting and unpacking why sports media is broken. There are a lot of reasons why, and literally there are simple reasons to fix it. So I'll expound on that, but they would only be simple based on the individual. You'll have to watch to find out, and that is a good video. Please watch that. I'd appreciate it. And obviously, I have the live stream, my podcast pregame every Monday and Thursday before the podcast gets recorded, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. My also live stream on Wednesday, 12 noon Eastern Time. Every Wednesday, my live stream there. Also, go to Live on Assist. Look me up, Live on Assist. I believe it's /u/JAYREELZ. That is a platform where I live stream games. So just like Twitch is for gamers to watch them play their favorite video game, well, Assist is also while I'm watching a game and in real time. Last night I watched Phillies Mets, the third game of that series. So everybody was watching my reaction, my everything, and that was a good time. I had my usual suspects in the room. Shout out to Cole, shout out to Bios, shout out to Brent, shout out to Jai, shout out to all the good people that pop up in the room. And please, you're missing out. So jump on board, connect with me. Also on my socials, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, or JAYREELZ on Instagram. On Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just a number. If you want to hit me up with a question, comment, suggestion, you could do so on the aforementioned, as well as the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. I quit my job to do this, and it's going to be now 19 months come next month. So things are on and popping. That's why I got all these different things happening. The podcast, as you know, the live streams, the critique videos, the commentary videos, the vlogs, lifestyle stuff, the now live streaming games, which keep yourself on that YouTube dial or my socials to be forewarned. Last night was a bit of a pop-up because I wanted to throw that out there, but there's going to be NFL games I'm going to stream live where you're going to get yours truly reaction. So I got to have you guys hop on board, because as long as I sit in front of this camera and microphone, I promise you, there is no one out there that's doing what I'm doing. Talking about all these sports, NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, college, NHL, golf, tennis, boxing, MMA, you name it, in roughly 1 hour or a little bit over an hour. Name any other podcast host that's doing that. I'm listening, still listening. No one. Not only it's done with credibility, it's done with integrity, it's done with the knowledge, with the passion, with the fire, the fury, the know-how, etc. on anything and everything. That happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond. Peace, love, and God bless everybody. Enjoy your Labor Day weekend. Have a safe one. I'll see you back here on Monday, the podcast pregame as well, on YouTube, 9:30 a.m. Eastern. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.